Now, this brings me on to my next point. There has been a lot of talk. If you've been on Twitter today, last night, anytime in between, one of the top trending topics on Twitter is NFL rigged. Hashtag NFL rigged. Now, this is interesting because officiating has been at an all-time low across sports in all categories the past couple years, especially football. Now, you know, I've never been an official. I've never cared to be an official. In fact, I've often said that I would never want to be a referee because you pretty much just get yelled and screamed at all the time. It's very rare for people to come up to an official or something. You did a phenomenal job calling this game. You made all the right calls. Thank you. It's very more often you're going to hear, hey, you did a terrible job officiating this game and you made all the wrong calls. Excuse me. You made all the wrong calls. And that's it's a tough gig, man. It really is. And, listen, I'm a fan, okay? I'm a fan. I try to analyze the game, fandom aside, as best as I can. But, being a fan, it's something that just happens where, the refs missed this call. They missed that. How did they see this? How did they not see that? This is the worst officiating I've ever seen. I mean, that's just something that happens when you become a fan. You notice every single thing. It's maybe not going right for your team all the time. But the level of NFL officiating has been really bad this year and years past, but this year really bad. People were going on Twitter. They had videos of, blocks in the backs on punts, punt returns, holding calls, roughing the passer. And, it's tough because I'm not trying to defend the officials because I'm really not, because I think they've really done a bad job all year long. I really do. But it's also a tough gig. I understand it. But, when you get to a certain level of a game, AFC Championship, playoffs, Super Bowl, when you have people not necessarily talking about how good of a game, how close of a game, how this one play, oh, did you see that play where this happened? This was a deciding factor. When you have people saying the deciding factor was the refs, that's bad. And I'm not talking about, oh, you're just complaining because your team lost and you didn't get the calls. That's one thing. But another thing is to, even for people that aren't fans of either team, such as myself, seeing the bad and the missed calls constantly, it's really tough to watch. And that's why you have, the conception that the NFL is rigged. There's script writers. There's, am I going to say the NFL is rigged? I'm not. But it is interesting. It is interesting, some of these calls that are missed all the time. I think it's more a thing of just bad officiating. There's no consistency. That's the problem, is there's no consistency across the league in calls. If there was a consistent line of rules that were called and penalties, and I think if the NFL understood it, the fans understood it, and the players understood it, you would have a more put together and cohesive understanding of the rules and what to expect. But you don't. You see, excuse me, what you have is, should we call this? Yes, maybe. Okay, I'm going to call it this time. Oh, I'm not going to call it that time. And I think one of the prime examples is this year, the roughing the passer. Roughing the passer was the worst I've ever seen in my entire life. I understand wanting to protect the quarterback. I really do. I get it. Because quarterbacks make the game go round, and you want to try to protect them if they are defenseless. Okay. There were some really bad calls this year where defensive linemen, it's almost like, what can they do? What can they do? And, they can barely touch a guy. And what are they supposed to do? If they barely touch the guy after the ball's thrown, if they grab him and they try to let up, I mean, there's so much to try to do in the midst of a game. That's the last thing you're thinking of. And to have players have to think about that in the back of their mind while they're playing. Now, if it's a completely egregious after the play call, then yeah, I understand. But to have some of these calls that were made were terrible. Now, for an example, I was at the Panthers Week 1 game against the Cleveland Browns, where Brian Burns got called for a roughing the passer penalty after it was on the last drive where the Browns drove down the field and kicked the game-winning field goal. And Panthers had played bad all game, but they had a chance to win this game. And this kick drove them all the way down there. The Browns ended up winning it, and it was a absolutely horrible roughing the passer call. I think Burns had his hand. Brian Burns, who made the play, got the penalty. He kind of had his hands near the shoulder pad of Jacoby Brissett, and they called that roughing the passer. He never even got him in the helmet or the face mask. It was just close to the area. They got him for a roughing the passer call. 15 yards, first down, they drive down. It does tend to feel very script-like in a lot of these situations, where another one, pass interference, especially on the defensive side, defensive pass interference. Listen, I'm not an NFL quarterback. I played corner in middle school and high school. It is tough. I would be willing to say that other than quarterback, playing corner is the toughest position to play. Especially now, because it is so hard to guard and defend a receiver in the pass in his trajectory across the field and not make any sort of contact without drawing a flag. I mean, listen, there are a lot of times where DBs do get a little handsy and they tend to grab and they rough. And I think a lot of that is penalty worthy. But there are so many times where it is the ball is hitting the receiver at the same time that the DB is trying to knock the ball down, and they will automatically call a flag. There is just no consistency. It's very tough. It's really tough. And it's a shame, because when you get to these high-level games, you don't want to look back on all this call here, this call there, this changed the game. Because I do think tonight I think that the Chiefs were the better team. They were. I think they really were. Joe Burrow did not have his best game tonight. The offensive line for the Bengals was not good. Chiefs did everything they needed to do to put themselves in a chance to win the game. But there were certainly some calls that were not favorable to the Bengals and some missed calls, and this is what we end up with. So here is my idea. I think the NFL, they're very good at not talking about things that come up sometimes. But, I know NFL refs are not full-time for the most part, and I could be wrong. Let me know if I'm wrong. I think for the most part they are not. I don't know if there are any full-time refs. In a game this big, in a league this popular that makes this much money, they should have full-time referees. They should. They should have full-time referees that in the off-season, they go back and they watch film on controversial calls, and they go back and they watch tape. And I'm sure they probably do this at certain, points in the off-season, or, whatever, referees are doing. But there should be a fully dedicated, as if players have training for the off-season, refs should have training for the off-season. Because if you really want to make this right, you have to get more training, and you've got to look back and see where you were wrong. And I'm talking, we need full-time refs all the time that are being trained, going back and watching film, analyzing what they got wrong, what they got right. Just as if a player goes back to watch film and wants to take a look at what he did right and what he did wrong and how he can get better. The refs need to do the same exact thing. And I think the NFL really should look at that issue and take it seriously, because NFL refs are a mockery right now. And across sports, refs are mockeries right now. And I think with the advantages of technology and camera angles and things have really helped. But we're still getting stuff wrong all the time and missing. And it's very unfortunate. So, what are you going to do? What are you going to do, NFL? I think you have to address this and do something, some sort of change. People talked about finding referees. I don't necessarily think that's, a bad move. I think it's a tough thing to implement, but I do think that, while there are players and coaches that if they constantly don't do their jobs correct, they could be traded, they could be cut, they could be benched, they could be not on the team anymore. Such things as coaches, they'll be fired. If you go to your job and you constantly mess up and you miss things, you're going to get reprimanded a couple times. But eventually this keeps happening. There's a good chance you might get fired. In the NFL, we have people miss stuff all the time. Refs usually have no accountability. They'll just come out and say, hey, I'm sorry, we missed a couple calls, and then that's it. There's no ref post-game conference to maybe explain some of the controversial calls. I don't really know what the right answer is. I think the best you can do is have full-time refs and maybe institute some sort of fine or penalization for them constantly missing things. But it's really tough. And I think this is something the NFL really needs to address, because if they don't, we're going to keep getting the same thing we're getting, and it's not good. It's not good at all. And that's not just in the NFL. That's across sports in general. So lots of stuff to look forward to there.